You are in the dentist's chair, and it is not the first time. The hygienist tilts the light, runs a metal hook along your gum line, and makes that little sound, the one that means she found something. Then comes the X-ray, and the dentist taps the screen and says the sentence that ends 1,000,000 appointments every year. That wisdom tooth has to come out. It is not the tooth's fault, exactly. It is a size problem. The jaws of our ancestors were built for a full row of molars, and somewhere along the way, your jaw stopped cooperating. You nod, book the surgery, and blame your family, because that is what everyone does. Here is what nobody tells you in that chair. That jaw is not a genetic accident. It is a receipt, and the bill is thousands of years old. By the end of this video, you'll never look at your jaw the same way again. That is a promise, because the real story of crooked teeth is hiding in places you never expect. A jawbone from 600,000 years ago, dug out of a sandpit in Germany with a full row of straight teeth and no cavities. A hunter in Tanzania who has never seen a dentist and has a better bite than most people today. A 9,000-year-old lump of chewing gum with somebody's DNA still locked inside it. And the real reason dentists book that surgery, which has a lot less to do with genes than with what great-grandparents ate. This is not a story about brushing. It is a story about the most underrated bone in the body, the one you use thousands of times a day, your jaw. Let's start with the story we all grew up with. The standard story says crooked teeth run in families. Grandpa had a crowded bite. Your dad wore braces. And you got the same teeth. Case closed. It says some people are just lucky, born with mouths that fit, and the rest of us inherited the bad deck. And there is a grain of truth in that. Genetics does set your tooth size, but the standard story has a hole in it. And the hole is history. When anthropologists measure the jaws of people who lived before farming, they find something your dentist never mentions. Crooked teeth are basically a new disease. Fossil skulls come out of the ground with jaws that are wide, long, and packed with straight rows of teeth. No braces, no floss, no crowding, and the moment soft food arrived, that changed. The jaw shrank. The teeth didn't decay. Before we go any further, we need to split this into two different problems, because you've been lumping them together your whole life. Problem 1 is cavities, decay. Problem 2 is malocclusion, the clinical word for a bad bite, crowded teeth, crooked teeth, impacted wisdom teeth, different diseases, different causes, different timelines. Remember that split. Cavities are about what touches the teeth, sugar, bacteria, acid. Crooked teeth are about what shapes the jaw, chewing, force, growth, sound like the same problem. They re-knot. Mix those two up and you'll spend your life blaming the wrong thing. One is an infection problem. The other is a construction problem. Start with cavities because that is the one everybody thinks they understand. Hunter-gatherers, the people who lived before farming, had remarkably clean mouths, not because they brushed, but because they ate almost no sugar, and their teeth wore down from tough food instead of rotting from the inside. Studies of pre-agricultural skulls find cavity rates below 5%, often close to 0. Then came farming. Clark Spencer Larson, an anthropologist who spent decades reading the bones of early farmers, laid it out in a landmark 1995 review. The shift to agriculture came with a jump in cavities and dental disease, because grain and stored food fed sugar and bacteria on a schedule. Why would growing our own food make our teeth worse? Because grain is sugar waiting to happen. Teeth got worse with civilization, and modern diets took that ancient trend and turned it into an epidemic. Tooth wear sounds like damage, but on a hunter-gatherer's teeth, wear was a sign of a working mouth. The enamel ground down evenly, the way a good tool gets worn smooth with use. Tools get used, so do teeth. A hunter teeth were filed by life, a little more with every meal, and the wear patterns tell archaeologists what was on the menu. Our teeth are filed by nothing, then they re-decayed by everything. A diet of grit and tough fiber left scratches that archaeologists still read 10,000 years later. A mouth full of cavities is the modern anomaly. A mouth without them is the historical baseline. And here is how we know what was actually going on inside those mouths. Dental calculus, the hardened plaque that survives on ancient teeth, is a time capsule. Back in 2017, a team at the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History sequenced the DNA locked in 50,000-year-old Neanderthal plaque, and one individual's calculus told a wild story. He had been chewing poplar bark, which contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. 50,000 years ago, somebody had a toothache and self-medicated with a plant, and his plaque kept the evidence for us. A 50,000-year-old prescription. That is how good teeth are at holding on to history. The mouth is the best preserved record of human life we have, and the record says our modern mouths are the weird ones. And while we in the mouth, let's settle something. Ancient people did take care of their teeth. They just did it without a brush. Egypt's earliest named dentist, an official called Ra, carried a title that translates roughly as chief of the dentists more than 4,000 years ago. Egyptians scrubbed with a powder of pumice and vinegar. The Romans even had a word for it, dentifricium, and their pharmacy shelves looked like a modern drugstore aisle, minus the branding. Same products, older packaging, half the world chewed on twigs, the same miswak sticks, still sold in health food stores today. The tools changed. The instinct didn't. The idea that hygiene is a modern invention, that people just ignored their teeth until the toothbrush showed up, is one of those myths that dies the second you look at the record. So cavities, fine, everyone knows the fix, brush, floss, see the dentist. Cavities were never the real puzzle. Here is the puzzle. Crooked teeth, because you can brush and floss perfectly, avoid every piece of candy, and still end up with a mouth full of teeth that don't fit. Meanwhile, the people who never brushed a day in their lives walk around with jawbones that look like they were drawn by an engineer. Let us give that jawbone from the sand pit its own moment. It is the Mauer mandible, the type specimen of a species called Homo heidelbergensis, pulled out of a gravel quarry near Heidelberg in 1907. 600,000 years old, and it carries a full arcade of teeth with no crowding and no decay, the dental equivalent of a perfect record, a perfect control. Whatever that jaw was chewing, it was working, and the bite still fit. How did that happen? Why do the people with the least dental care in history have the best dental alignment? Meet the Hadza. They a hunter-gatherer people in Tanzania, and they are one of the last living windows into how humans ate for most of our existence. The anthropologist Frank Marlowe, who lived with them for years and wrote the definitive book on them, describes the same sight again and again: wide jaws, full rows of straight teeth, almost no decay, people who have never owned a toothbrush. So what is their secret? It is workload. It is workload. They eat meat, tubers, honey, berries, and seeds, and they chew all of it hard. A Hadza child grows up with jaws that are constantly exercised, the way an athlete's muscles are exercised, tearing through tough meat, cracking marrow bones, grinding fibrous roots for hours at a stretch. Chewing is a full-time job, and the kid's face literally grows around that workload. The first thing you notice at a Hadza meal is the noise, crack, grind. Jaws doing actual work. No soundtrack, no screens. And here is the part that should make you sit up in that chair. The jaw responds to the workload. A jaw is not a fixed piece of bone people are born with. It is a growing structure, and how much it grows depends on how hard it is asked to work. Here is the biology. and it is simpler than dentists make it sound. Your jaws grow the most during childhood and the teenage years, and that growth responds to mechanical stress. Chewing hard, tough food sends signals through the bone, and the bone answers by growing, the same way a muscle answers a heavy weight. Bones listen to load. That is the whole trick. The result is a bigger, wider jaw with room for every tooth that was inherited. Soft, processed food sends almost no signal. And guess what happens when the food stops chewing back? The jaw grows less, stays smaller, and the teeth, which are still ancestor-sized, show up to find a room that is too small. That is crowding. That is your crooked teeth. That is the wisdom tooth that has to come out. Not because the teeth are wrong, because the jaw never finished the job it was built for. Here is the experiment that should make orthodontists rethink their entire field. And it wasn't done in a clinic. Back in 1982, two researchers, Robert Corruccini and a primatologist named Rose Beecher, took a colony of macaques and split it down the middle. Same species, same genes, same babies. One side got the hard, fibrous food monkeys are built for, fruit with tough rinds, seeds that need real chewing, the kind of meal that takes an afternoon. The other side got the monkey equivalent of a soft modern diet, cooked and mushy, food that never fought back. The monkeys grew up, and the researchers measured their mouths. The hard-chewing group developed wide jaws with room for every tooth. The soft food group came out with crowded, misaligned bites. The primate version of an orthodontist's waiting room. Same genes, different food, different jaws. A result like that doesn't need a commentary track. The results were blunt. That is not a theory about humans. It is a demonstration run on a primate and published in Science. And it is one of the cleanest experiments in the history of dentistry. Corruccini went on to make this case the hardest of anyone, spending his career comparing the jaws of traditional and industrialized populations and finding the same pattern over and over. Groups that eat traditional, tough, unprocessed food have low rates of malocclusion. Groups that switch to soft, processed food see the rates jump, often within a single generation. A generation is enough. He was so convinced that in 1999 he published a book arguing that malocclusion is a civilization disease, a disease of industrial eating, not a genetic curse. Two closely related groups, one fed wild roots, the other fed refined porridge, and the jaws diverge within a couple of generations. His sharpest case was the Pima community in Arizona, where a switch to government-issued processed food was followed by a spike in crowded bites inside a single generation. The teeth stay the same. The food writes the jaw. The same logic explains why human faces have been shrinking for thousands of years. Daniel Lieberman, a Harvard biologist who wrote the book on the evolution of the human head, points out that faces got smaller as food got softer, and the jaw shrank right along with them. In that 2011 book, Lieberman walks through the fossil record the way a detective walks a crime scene, and the culprit keeps turning out to be the same thing: softer food. It wasn't T1 dramatic mutation. It was a response generation after generation to chewing less. And the teeth, the most genetically stubborn structures in the body, didn't keep up. So ancient teeth keep arriving in modern jaws. And that mismatch is why close to half the industrialized world ends up in orthodontics. And it is why wisdom teeth, which used to be useful grinding tools, now crowd the back of the mouth like guests, showing up to a wedding that is already full. Ever wonder why we call them wisdom teeth? They not wise. They just late. And here is the part that sounds like a joke, but isn't. The mouth is still changing. Right now, roughly a third of people are born without at least one wisdom tooth, and the number keeps climbing in industrialized populations. Third molars are the last teeth to appear and the first to get squeezed out, and a growing number of researchers read that as evolution in real time, the body quietly writing wisdom teeth out of the contract. Give it a few thousand more years, the speculation goes, and the whole tooth may be gone. Biologists have a name for that kind of structure, vestigial, a leftover, like the appendix, bad reputation. We, rewatching a species adjust its own hardware in real time. It just happens to be happening in the back of the mouth. And about that 9,000-year-old chewing gum I promised. Back in 2019, a team at Stockholm University studied lumps of ancient gum, birch bark tar with tooth marks pressed into them. Found at a site in Sweden called Husby Clev, the stuff the gum was made of, birch bark tar, was probably chewed for a reason. It is sticky, mildly antiseptic, and it held the DNA in place like amber holds a fly. Inside the tar, they found DNA hazelnut duck and the chewer herself, a teenage girl who lived almost 10,000 years ago. The tar sat in a Swedish peat bog for 9,000 years, cold and waterlogged, before anyone thought to look inside. Her teeth were the receipt. She chewed gum, we know her lunch, we know her age, and the only reason any of it survived is that her teeth left prints in the tar. Her DNA gave us the color of her eyes and the state of her gums, all of it frozen in a lump of discarded gum. Teeth are the most durable thing a human body makes, which is a little poetic. Honestly, the part that is supposed to rot is the part that outlasts everything else. Quick tangent, because you've very definitely seen this on your feed, there is a whole internet subculture built around mewing, pressing the tongue against the roof of the mouth to reshape the jaw, with before and after photos that are, let's be honest, mostly lighting and posture. The science on adult jaw reshaping is nowhere near as confident as the influencers, and I am not going to settle that argument today. But here is what I find genuinely funny. The reason mewing caught on at all is that the underlying idea that jaw shape responds to use is ancient and real. It just works on growing children, not on 30-year-olds, filming themselves in a bathroom mirror. The internet reinvented a 10,000-year-old principle and added a subscription fee. For real. Anyway, back to the bones. Now here is the part that makes this personal, because this didn't happen slowly over 10,000 years, it also happened fast. In the last 2 centuries, when industrial mills started producing flour so fine that bread stopped being a workout, dentists in the cities started reporting a new epidemic of crowded, crooked teeth, the kind of thing your grandparents' generation barely knew. By the turn of the 20th century, orthodontics had become a whole industry built on fixing mouths that used to fit. The man who built it was Edwin Mellen, a dentist from Pennsylvania, who published the first modern textbook on Malocclusion in 1887 and opened the world's first school of orthodontics in 1900. Before Mellen, there was even a standard way to describe a bad bite. He had to invent the classification, the brackets, the whole idea that a bite could be engineered. One man's filing system. His first school opened in St. Louis, and a Midwestern city became the improbable birthplace of the modern straight smile. And here is how fast the shift really was. During the Boer War, the British Army turned away volunteers by the thousands over bad teeth, so many that the panic helped push the country toward the world's first school dental service barely a generation after nobody had even thought to look. And the hardware itself is older than the industry. The Etruscans wired loose teeth with gold bands 2,500 years ago. Roman doctors made bridges. The technology is ancient. The epidemic is new. In 50 years, crooked teeth had gone from a private misfortune to a national security problem. And here is the darkly funny part. The industry treats the symptom brilliantly and the cause barely at all. Nobody prescribes chewing. The orthodontist just puts a wire on your teeth and sends you on your way. Pull back and look at the whole picture because it changes how you see your own face. The jaw is one of the most direct places in the skull where what we eat leaves a mark. The rest, the eye sockets, the cheekbones, the brain case, is mostly finished by early childhood, though the face keeps growing into the teenage years. The jaw stays open for business through adolescence. taking orders from your diet. Diet is the foreman. Most of the skeleton is done by 20. The jaw is still taking orders at 14. So when someone has a strong jawline, we not looking at genes alone. We looking at a childhood spent chewing. And when we see jaws shrinking all over the industrialized world, we not watching evolution. We watching a species that learned to puree everything. We pureed our way into this. Now let us be honest about the limits, because this story gets oversimplified fast. This does not mean every ancient human had a perfect smile, and it does not mean all modern crooked teeth are your fault. Bad luck happens. Genetics still matters. Trauma matters. And some mouths are crowded even on the toughest diet. It also does not mean brushing is useless. Brushing fights cavities, plaque, and gum disease, and skipping it is a terrible idea. Please, keep brushing. The point is narrower and stranger. The shape of the jaw is not a fixed inheritance. It is partly a response to use. The people who chew hard growing up end up with more room for their teeth. The people who eat soft food end up paying the orthodontist. And nobody, in all the years we've been doing this, ever ask the obvious question: what if we fix the room instead of just the teeth? So here is the sentence this whole video has been building toward. Your teeth never changed. Your jaw did. And your jaw is shaped by what you eat. Next time you sit in that chair and the dentist starts explaining an extraction, look at the X-ray for a second. That crowd of teeth at the back. That is not your family curse. It is a 10,000-year-old invoice for soft food. And we all holding it. The hunter in Tanzania never saw a bill like that. The teenager in Sweden chewing her gum 9,000 years ago never saw one either. They had jaws that fit. We have Wi-Fi and mashed potatoes. Somewhere along the way, we traded one kind of wealth for another. Small comfort, I know. But the next time someone asks why the family teeth are crooked, you can honestly say, no, that is great-great-grandmother's porridge. Then book the surgery anyway. Some invoices are easier to pay than to argue with.